Today, my speech, I'm going to talk about the history of surrogacy in the United States. How does the Californian system operate? And then I'm going to refer to the rest of the United States to give you an idea. What are the safeguards that are in place when you do surrogacy in the United States? And I'm also going to talk a little about the cost of surrogacy in the United States. Surrogacy in America is roughly a 32-year history. Our program has been around for 32 years, and we were one of the original programs that did surrogacy, and that goes back to the days where there was no IVF. It was all traditional surrogacy, where we would take the sperm of the intended father and put it into the surrogate mom. Things have changed a lot since then, and now it's very rare that a surrogate mom is related to the child that she is carrying. And although we still do it occasionally, it's just less than 1% of all cases in America. Surrogacy in America is governed at the state level. So America is divided into federal law and state law. Federal law gets passed by the government officials, and it covers everyone. There are no exceptions. Everyone, no matter which state you live in, has to follow the law. But surrogacy falls under state law, so every individual state makes its own laws. And it's important that you understand the law of the state where your surrogate mom lives. Most states in the United States are actually pro-surrogacy. There are very few states that will not permit surrogacy. The California system, we are governed by state law in California, so we are governed by precedent. What did the Supreme Court say about surrogacy? We actually don't have any legislative laws. There are two very notable cases, Johnson versus Calvert and Bisanca versus Bisanca. They both went to the Supreme Court. Johnson versus Calvert was a gestational surrogacy case. The child was related to the intended mother and intended father, and the surrogate mom changed her mind. It was an independent case. Went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and at every level, the court said this child belongs with the intended parents, the mother and the father, that the surrogate mom has no rights to the child. And then we had a very, very interesting case, Bisanca versus Bisanca. And this is a case where you had intended mother and father, you had surrogate mom, you had sperm donor and egg donor. So potentially the court was confronted with a case where there are 5 potential parents. And the court said, what do we do? One of the lower courts had found that there were no parent for the child, which the Supreme Court said is an impossibility. So the court had to grapple with the issue of how do we find out who are the parents. And very interestingly, what this court decided was that genetics is irrelevant. And California stands alone as one of the most unusual states in that we in California say whoever intends to be the parent is the parent of the child. Biology doesn't count. If you intended to be the parent, if you took the steps towards procreation, you're the parents. Surrogate mom has no standing in this arrangement. So think of it this way. If your surrogate mom gives birth, I can come along as an owner of an agency and say, you know what, I always wanted another kid. I want this kid. That's about as much standing as your surrogate mom has. The court's going to look at me and say, move aside, go get therapy. They're going to say the same thing to your surrogate mom. You have no standing to even appear before the court. So it's all about who is the intended parent. In California, we work on a pre-birth order. So attorneys will go ahead and get a pre-birth order, which means before the birth, a court will give us a judgment stating who the intended mother and father is, and that judgment is issued on the hospital, telling the hospital when this birth occurs, this is how you fill out the birth certificate. And that's it. Surrogacy is as simple as that. Now, what does the surrogacy contract involve? Surrogacy contract is a contract between the surrogate mom and the intended parents. It's got nothing to do with the agency. Both parties are represented by attorneys. So the surrogate mom will make changes, the intended parents will make changes, but both sides have independent legal guidance throughout this process. Most of the contracts are approved by US courts. It's very rare you're going to get a case going up where the courts say we don't approve this contracts. The contract will also deal with the financial aspects. So there is no guessing, there is no blackmail that can occur, there is no, oh, I didn't know. Everything is written in your contract. It is clear, it is concise, you know exactly what you're signing, you know exactly what your obligations are going to be. The contract will also outline a surrogate mom's obligations, and roughly her obligation is to follow doctor's orders, eat as healthy as she can, listen to everything her doctor tells her to do for the pregnancy, and hand over the baby to you. That's her obligations. Intended parents' obligations are pretty easy. Paying for all the costs that were incurred because your child is coming into this world. So you don't pay for the surrogate mom's rent. She's already living in a house. But any costs that she incurs because she's helping you, those are the costs you're going to reimburse the surrogate mom. The other intended parent's obligation, of course, is you need to show up for your child's birth and you need to take your baby home. So most couples here are going to say, oh my goodness, that's the most wonderful part, but there have been 65 cases in America where couples from around the world did not turn up to birth and take their baby home. So the reality of my world, and I've been doing surrogacy now for 22 years, even though the agency has been around for 32, is I screen every single couple that comes to our program. Because I don't want you changing your mind. I want you to be really informed what you're getting into. 64 babies are living with another family because those parents didn't come to pick up their children. Which means you are 3 times more likely to change your mind than any surrogate mom is to change her mind. I just thought that might be interesting for people out there who somehow believe that surrogate moms change their minds, because they don't. It's the parents that often do. It's just an unreported fact. Breach by the surrogate mom. Of course, if a surrogate mom breaches the contract, she doesn't follow doctor's orders, she drinks coffee when she's not supposed to drink coffee. There are consequences to all those behaviors because she's agreed by contract to do certain things. We divide things, breaches, into material breach and immaterial breaches. And roughly the only breach that's really relevant is a surrogate mom not telling you where the birth of your baby will be. Very rarely happens in the field of surrogacy. Breach by intended parents, you don't fund the trust account, you refuse to come and collect your baby. So it's very rare in the field of surrogacy, especially in America, that we get any conflict between the intended parents and the surrogate moms, because you are so informed as you go through this process. Of course, we go ahead and we get a judgment of maternity or a judgment of paternity. If there's 2 dads involved, we can actually get both dads on the birth certificate, recognizing both of you as the parents of the child, which is what we should be doing. These children have 2 parents. If one parent passes away, that child should without doubt be given to the second parent, that the only other parent these children ever know. And in California, we recognize 2 parents. Egg donors and sperm donors have no rights in the state of California and in many other states as well. And we can always expedite birth certificates, which means you end up being in California for approximately 10 or 20 days after birth. Whereas if you're a regular person living in California, sometimes it can take us 6 months to get birth certificates. But we're able to expedite them for you. Turning to surrogacy in the rest of the United States, again, remember we're dividing this into who has legislative law and who has case law. Certain states, for example, I didn't list them all, Illinois, Utah, Texas, and Kansas has legislative law. They've passed law governing surrogacy. And the rule of thumb that I use is whenever you work with a state that has legislative law, always add the word but. So it is legal to do surrogacy, but you must be married. That's pretty much universal, Stephanie, in almost every single state, right? You must be married. If you are not a married couple, you're not going to be falling under the protection of that law. So whenever there's legislative law, as much as we all get very excited that a new law was passed, we also know that there are certain restrictions involved. On the other hand, you have case law.
So does that law only apply to American citizens or international as well?
Any person living within the jurisdiction of that state. So whether you're international, whether you're legal or illegal, the laws of the country apply to you. So yes, it does protect you. Case law, on the other hand, which is what California has, Arkansas, Ohio, Connecticut, and a few other states, this is where there has been a dispute, or even not been a dispute, but someone wants to take the case up, and then a higher court or Supreme Court gives down the judgment. And because it creates precedent, every other judge has to follow that precedent. And in California, we have the 2 cases I talked about. So no matter where your surrogate mom gives birth in the state of California, every single judge has to follow the laws of those Supreme Court cases, the rulings of those Supreme Court cases. Then you have a few states that are policy and procedure. which means there's neither one of the other two because no one's disputed surrogacy, but we know that the judges always do things in a certain way. And then there are a few, which I call the no-no states. Never, never, never do surrogacy in those states under any circumstances. And that's going to be New York, New Jersey, Arizona, Michigan, Washington, Louisiana, and Washington, D.C. So you'd never want to do surrogacy in those states because a surrogate mom generally has her right to change her mind. And you owe it to your children not to take those kind of risks. How do you return home with your baby if a baby is born in America? Well, you're going to get an American birth certificate. Your child is an American citizen, and therefore you are entitled to an American passport. Everything gets expedited. An American passport is just invaluable. You're not, when you go to some other countries, you can't get a passport in that country. You have to apply to Australia to grant citizenship to your child. America is different. Your child already has citizenship. Your child will then return to America and ask to be converted to an Australian citizen because of you as the parents. But your child retains citizenship. So no matter what Australians do with their laws, in case they say no more surrogacy and you're 6 months pregnant, you don't have to, you're not going to be stranded somewhere without a passport for your child. Your child will always have an American passport and be an American citizen. It takes approximately 10 to 20 days after birth for you to get all the necessary documentation that you need. Sometimes it can take 30 days if you happen to come at Christmas, because we shut down a lot for Christmas. So don't have a baby born in December if you're in a rush. Choose another time of the year. But on average, it takes 10 to 20 days and you're home. You can get on an airplane and return home. Obtaining non-American citizenship, by this I mean citizenship of the country that you come from, whether it's Australia or China, that we will help you with. We have never failed in our 32-year history to help parents go home, and every parent in the program is living in their country with their child. We have never had a couple be stranded in America, not being allowed to or permitted to go home, despite the fact of changes in law. Germany, for example, suddenly said no more surrogacies were allowed. But we had a multitude of pregnancies that were presently ongoing. We got an exception for every one of those couples in our program. The costs I'm going to come back to a little bit later. So what are the safeguards when you do surrogacy in America? I think the important things to recognize is that you have got professionals with years of experience. Surrogacy has been in America for 32 years. We teach courses at university about third-party reproduction. We talk about the ethics of it, we go into the legal aspects of it. It is actually taught as a core course at many universities. You have a numerous number of psychologists you can consult with. There's doctors, there's lawyers, there's so many people. We have meetings about surrogacy where we discuss the various aspects and we discuss cases that have gone wrong. So you really have professionals with many, many years of experience with thousands of births between us that we are sharing. Separation of professionals, this to me is a core issue, and I even have a little complaint against some American companies because they don't follow these rules. There should be a separation of professionals. I think it protects you as the intended parents the most. By this I mean your reproductive endocrinologist needs to be independent of the agency. He should not own an agency. I mean that the psychologist that's consulting with you and screening your surrogate mom should not also be your reproductive endocrinologist. It needs to be a separate person. The surrogate mom's attorney and the surrogate mom's attorney and the intended parent's attorney need to be two separate people. They shouldn't be working in the same law firm. You need to have independent people who are looking after their clients only. So at one time, Bill and I at the Center for Surrogate Parenting, because we are both attorneys, we did all the legal work. And about 18 years ago, we decided that that was wrong because we owned the agency, and we actually took away all our legal work and gave it to an independent legal firm and then outsourced all the surrogate moms because we felt better that clients had someone protecting just them. And I, as an agency, am responsible, and I have to answer to all of these professionals. A surrogate mom's attorney can call me with questions. The intended parents can call me with questions, and they can hold me accountable. There is nothing that I can hide because they get access to all the records. Access to a surrogate mom's delivery records, I believe, is very, very important. I mean, we interview surrogate moms all the time, and my colleague in the room somewhere, Kim Bergman, one of the psychologists, interviews surrogate moms all the time as well. And surrogate moms forget about their pregnancies. So you say to them, hey, did you have any Michael, how many times do they make mistakes?
100%.
Surrogate moms, you'll say, what was your pregnancies like, any complications? And they always say, no, wonderful pregnancies. And then you get their medical records, and oh my goodness, they had high blood pressure. And they say, well, it was only a little bit. Oh, what about your diabetes? Well, it was diet controlled. You forget, as women, we forget some of the things that happen in our lives because it's not that important anymore. But it's really important to the success of whether we can get you pregnant. So what we do in America is we will get hold of all the surrogate moms' delivery records, and it will go to your doctor, your reproductive endocrinologist, like Dr. Feynman here, and you review all those records to make sure that we're not relying on her memory, because her memory might not be good enough. They're wonderful, delightful, the sweetest ladies you can imagine, but they forget. And we need to make sure we create the best environment possible for your child. So we have an independent person looking at those records. We even have her OB answer a question, which is, would you recommend and do you think she's going to be okay for surrogacy? Because he took her through her pregnancies. And he will sign that with his signature, yes or no. So I think that's invaluable, getting access to medical records, because if you have a miscarriage, you're not going to know if that's your surrogate mom had 3 other miscarriages but never told anyone. So despite the fact that she has 2 kids, she might have had 3 or 4 miscarriages that you are totally unaware of. Nationwide criminal background check is performed in America, so we go and we check every single surrogate mom to make sure what we are dealing with. Did she ever have a problem with drugs? We want to know that. Because if something happens in her life while she's pregnant and she gets stressed, is she going to revert back to something? We are looking after children. You want to be as careful as we can with these precious children. We do check references. So we check 3 family and 3 friends. And the reason for doing this is we want to know that she's proud of what she's doing and she has told people around her. And we want their opinions because they've known her for years. I've only known her for a few hours sometimes when I'm screening a surrogate mom. So we want to go back to her family and friends and say, as you know, your friend Mary is going to be a surrogate mom. What do you think of that? And then I'm going to find out that she spoke to her friend, which means she's thinking about the process. She's telling people, she's having conversations. We want to go to her family. We want to go to her mother, her sister, her brother, and say, your daughter's going to be a surrogate mom. What do you think about that? We don't want to be stressing the family that the mother finds out and never wants to speak to her daughter again or tells her she's committing a sin. We want to be as open as we possibly can. But more important, we're looking after our surrogate moms, because if she ends up being ill during this pregnancy, we want her family, who are being supportive of what she's done and are being proud of her, coming forward to help her and her husband with their children. If she's going to be hospitalized for 3 months, who's going to help us with the birthday party for her kids? Who's going to take her kids to school? Who's going to do all the things that mommy should be doing at home? So we want to make sure we have a really good, solid network of supportive people behind her, knowing that she's doing something marvelous that the family is proud of. We also go ahead, one of the other safeguards you have is the medical accountability of our reproductive endocrinologists and our OBs. Reproductive endocrinologists have to be licensed. They've got a board that they're accountable to. Our FDA does audits on officers on a regular basis. They want to see how many cycles you've been doing, how many embryos you have left over, what was the quality, where are the embryos, this vial that you said belongs to this particular couple according to your medical records. They will go and check that your embryos are safe and where they should be, and that everything in the office has been done correctly. So you get an accountability. And the same with the OB. If your surrogate mom miscarriage, we can hold that OB accountable. We can go and look at the records. We can get a second opinion about those records to give you information as to why did this miscarriage occur. Can we do genetic testing? Is there something wrong with the uterus? Did she misbehave potentially? What was it that might have caused this? You need valuable information so you can decide what your next step is going to be. And then, of course, we have a legal system, which we're pretty notorious for, of everyone suing each other. But in this particular instance, our legal system is there to protect everyone in this room. So if your reproductive endocrinologist does something wrong, there's going to be an attorney out there that will hold that person accountable. If the OB does something wrong, there's someone out there to hold that OB accountable. If your surrogate mom's involved in a car accident and some harm is done to your child, there's an attorney out there that's going to protect your child's rights until the age of 18. So we have a legal system that's going to protect you until your child is 18 years old, and that's invaluable. Typical costs of surrogacy. Typical cost of surrogacy will range anywhere from $80,000 to $150,000. It's a wide range, and it's because I don't know what kind of surrogacy you're doing. I don't know if you're 42 years old using your own eggs, or whether you're working with your sister as an egg donor, or whether you're going to get a young egg donor who's previously successful. So there's many variables that occur, but that is a typical range of surrogacy costs in America. On top of that, we've got the costs of insurance, and this is something that's totally in flux, and in the next, I don't know, 3-4 weeks, we should have a Supreme Court ruling on Obamacare, and that's going to, I believe, change the field of surrogacy. So what I'm talking about is that President Obama passed a law that said everyone in America is entitled to insurance. Okay, it's being appealed right now because there are certain members of the public that are saying, you can't force me to buy insurance. It's against our Constitution to make me do something I don't want to do. So we're waiting to find out what's going to happen. Will the Supreme Court say that every American is entitled to insurance, or will they strike the whole bill down? Here's the advantage, and I know it's again some blank stares back here, but this is what I'm talking about. Your child is American. If your child is born and is ill, you can now buy an insurance policy in America for your newborn baby that will cover all the costs that your child may be in the NICU. This is invaluable. We'll know the answer to this in the next few weeks. How much time do I have left? Okay. So some general statistics. Oh, yes.
We'll do questions at the conversation with a couple of lawyers in California last month, and we've been told that there's been a few changes in the insurance policy when it comes to twin pregnancies, which is very different to one baby. And we've been advised that we cannot no longer go with twin pregnancies.
Okay, that's something different, and I can answer your question later, but you're talking about a private insurance company that was selling insurance to couples that prefers you to singleton. That's an independent private company. We're talking about Obamacare that will fundamentally allow your child, just like my children who are born in America, buy a policy themselves. So you might not need the other company anymore. So this could change everything in the field of surrogacy, and we'll know the answer in a few weeks, and I can answer it more fully for you afterwards. Okay, here's some general statistics that I thought were just rather interesting. In America, most couples end up being matched with only one surrogate mom, and they'll get a pregnancy and go on for a live birth. So you generally are only going to need to meet one surrogate mom. Miscarriage rate is pretty normal compared to whether you do surrogacy or you're carrying your own pregnancy, conceived the typical way. It's only a 3% miscarriage rate. Twin rate, approximately 60%. In my program, it's a little higher than 60%. But we have about a 60% success rate when 2 egg donor embryos are implanted. We're moving very strongly as an agency, and there's many other agencies. I know Growing Generation is doing the same thing, where we prefer couples to have a singleton embryo. We're getting great success rates right now. You're getting fabulous success rates with single embryo transfers. The number of embryos being implanted in America remains 2. We very rarely implant 3 embryos, but there's a huge move towards implanting only 1 embryo, which I just love. The number of attempts for someone to get a pregnancy that goes full term to a birth is 2.2 attempts. That statistic is slightly higher because a lot of my clients are using their own eggs, where they're above the age of 38, so you're going to have more attempts. If you're using a donor egg, the statistics will be slightly lower. Less than 5% of babies born as a singleton, one child, will need to have more than 2 days in the hospital. And the only reason for those 2 days is because the surrogate mom's in the hospital, so your baby gets 2 free days. And approximately 35% of twins will need at least 5 days in hospital. So we do everything we can to encourage you to try and avoid a twin pregnancy, and that a singleton pregnancy, one at a time, is the right way to go. And I believe that this is something that Australians and almost all the IVF clinics in Australia believe in as well, and it's something that we're trying to help Americans move towards. And I think I am done. Thank you, everyone.
Lisa Banfield's life changed in 1996 when at 29 she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. The diagnosis came out of the blue.
He said, I've got some very bad news. Well, you've got cervical cancer. And I went, cervical cancer? And I said, I don't think I even quite knew what my cervix was. And he said, well, what our advice is that you have to have a radical hysterectomy.
The hysterectomy involved removing her womb, but Lisa was still determined to one day have a child of her own. Even before surgery, Lisa and John began a search for a surrogate willing to carry their baby. Strict laws in New Zealand ban commercial surrogacy. It's only approved in extreme medical circumstances. The search for a surrogate took them to California, where surrogacy is legal. Lisa and John joined hundreds of international couples taking advantage of the laws here every year. And in August 2002, a California agency contracted Chrissy Prelowicz, a mother of two, to carry the Banfield's baby.
I just can't imagine not being able to have a child if that's what you want to have. And if I can help somebody do that, I'm more than happy to do it.
It's a slow 8 hours before Chrissy heads into the final stages of labour and the climax of her role as a surrogate mother.
The twins are going at about 148 beats per minute. I think I'm going at about 160.
No. Big breath. Now hold your air in. Hold your air in. Push. Hold it in. Push. Push.
It's a day they thought might never come. Joshua Francis takes his first breath.
Of the dead.
Seven minutes later, the second boy is born. Lucas Christopher, named after Chrissy.
I got it. This one. Look at you.
The cutting of the cord is the symbolic transfer of parenthood.
What are you guys doing for the baby?